Hello, and welcome to the show. In this series, we're going to make a 2D game from scratch using Unity. Let's get started. First, we want to open a blank 2D project. Name it anything you want, and make sure you know its directory. Once we are in Unity, you'll want to make a couple of folders. You can do this by right-clicking in the Assets folder. Name one folder Scripts, and the other one Art. Now, the next step is not necessary and is for my own workflow, but if you want, you can organize your workspace as shown in the video. I'll put on some music in the meantime. You'll want to grab the animation tab and put it in your workspace. We don't need the animator even though I did open it in the video. We're not going to be using it. Okay, time to import your sprites. If you're using the sprites in this tutorial via Patreon, then you'll want to follow my import settings for the best results. Otherwise, you can just mess around with the import settings with your own sprites. Now we'll jump into animation. But before we do that, you'll need to create your first game object. Just right-click in the hierarchy and create an empty game object. With your game object selected, go to the Animations tab and hit Create. On a side note, you'll want to make an Animations folder in the Assets folder, as you did with the Art and Scripts folder. Once that folder is set up, then hit the Create button and assign your animation files there. The two animations made in this video are just named Idle and Walk. Before we get into the coding bit, you'll need to make sure you have the animator, sprite renderer, and rigid body 2D assigned to your player game object. You can add these components with the Add Component button at the bottom of the inspector. On the rigid body 2D, make sure you set the gravity to 0 and freeze rotation on the Z-axis. Lastly, you'll need to make a script and name it whatever you want. And for the sake of this tutorial, mine is Basic Player. Capital B, capital P. Make sure you add that to the player game object as well. Time to code. First things first, we're going to get rid of the comments because, well, it's newbie. Start function will run once on startup of an enabled object or at the beginning of the game. Update checks code every frame. That's pretty much what you need to know. Let's start by grabbing our components off the game object via code. Rigid body first, then our animator. We'll make these global variables. The rigid body will make our character move based on physics calculations, and the animator will make our character art move based on the parameters we set in code. We're going to need these from the start, so they go in the start function. Next, we're going to make a function to put all of our player movement code. The parameter where I wrote float and speed is not necessary. You can make that float global and give it a hard value if you like. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just follow along. Now you're going to make two float variables, x and y. Using these variables, we're going to pull from Unity's legacy input system with these calls, input get axis raw horizontal and vertical. Float x and y are going to go into a vector2. Name the vector2 like so, and then declare a new vector2 with your x and y variables in the parameters. Okay, next we're going to make an if statement, and in the parameters put the name of the vector2, dot, then the variable. We are basically saying with this if statement that if horizontal input and vertical input are greater or less than 0, we want the rigid body to kick in. Rigid body being the built-in physics of Unity. So rigid, which is what I name my rigid body variable, dot velocity, with my calculation, the vector2, x, and y multiplied by my speed parameter. Let's specify with else if instead of generalizing with else. Set the velocity to 0 with the shorthand code. Make sure you normalize your x and y values so they don't add together when moving at angles. Put your function in update, declare the speed variable here. 3 is good for me, but this can be whatever. Let's do our animation call, starting with the variable name .play and with the name of the animation in quotations. Last thing we need to do is to flip our sprite when going in the opposite direction. We will access the transform component, which I forgot to cover earlier. Every game object has a component automatically, so you can access it like this and change the scale of it. In this case, we're flipping the X scale of the sprite. Save all this work and let's see if it worked out. Looking good. Alright, that's the video. Next video in the series will work on attacking. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the bell so you're notified on future tutorials. Check out the Patreon. Check out my main project, Sword and Casket. And until then, see ya.